January 10th, Ray Neufeld.
Buried bitterness breeds nothing but trouble. Face off with God, He will set you free. For Ray Neufeld, it was time to face off with God. Ray packed a bag, climbed into his truck, and drove toward his lake house in Ontario. As he drove, his mind wandered back to the trade of 1985, when he had replaced a popular player on the Winnipeg Jets. The player was a stand-up guy, popular with his teammates, popular with the fans, popular with everybody. Usually stuff happens and life carries on. Guys get traded and hockey carries on. But for Ray, that trade never went away. Even many years later, when Ray walked the streets of Winnipeg, people remembered him as the guy from the trade in '85. Ray hadn't even wanted to move to the Jets, but he had shown up, played hard, and had a successful hockey career. Why couldn't he be remembered for his contributions? It especially hurt because he was a Manitoba native. The lack of acceptance got so old and painful that after Ray retired from hockey, he didn't even enter a rink for more than 10 years. When Ray arrived at the lake house, he parked and unlocked the door, hunkered down for the long, cold Canadian winter. In the silent, snowy stillness, it was just him and God. The days unfolded slowly. So did Ray's thoughts, emotions, and reflections. He had pushed his pain down. A man was supposed to just move on, right? But deep inside, Ray hadn't moved on. Now Ray told God stuff he had never told anyone. He told God about all the pain and all the disappointment in his life. At first it felt scary, but what was he afraid of? It was always safe to be honest with God. As Ray began to be honest with himself, grief dripped out in tears, wailed out in sobs, roared out in screams. Years of bitterness poured out as he began to write in his journal. Now he understood his pain had festered into buried bitterness. Bitterness had colored his ability to process life, spilled out into other jobs and even relationships. It created new challenges. As he had lived through the problems, he had wondered where God was. Back then, when he had asked God and heard nothing, it compounded the pain, which he had lugged around hidden for years. New thoughts surfaced. When he got traded, he had struggled for sobriety. With the trade came teammates Doug Smale and Lori Boschman, and Ray hung with them to avoid alcohol. They became friends and showed him Jesus. Ray quit drinking and put his life together. The trade gave him a renewed relationship with Jesus. But then he had allowed the hurt of the trade to push Jesus away. Why was he so bitter at hockey? All over Canada, boys dreamed of the life that he had lived. Sure, as a hometown player, it hurt to receive such little respect. But did it matter in the big picture of life? Of being on God's team? People could say what they wanted. It didn't have to affect who he was. Snow fell, winter days stretched. Ray forgave those who had hurt him. He released bitterness, but when God asked Ray to forgive himself, it was harder. Too often, Ray had allowed bitterness to drive his words into actions. And after he did that, gnawing guilt ate at him. Now, face to face with God, Ray confronted all the ways he had failed. He got it all out in the open. God took it, forgave it, and gave Ray peace, like he had been bathed from the inside out. Relaxation rolling down from the top of his head, flushing through him, spreading out, and replacing the old feelings. Once he understood how huge God's forgiveness was, Ray saw God more clearly, worshiped Him more deeply, and lived in the new freedom. For sure, in springtime, Manitoba was icy, but Ray's heart had thawed. He felt connected to God. He read his Bible, and he journaled hopeful things, like God's promises, and praised God through the music. Ray clung to the words he read in the first chapter of Philippians, that God would finish the good work that He started in him. When Ray put God and his perspective first, Ray again felt like a champion. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 tells us, "Look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many." The battle we often face is when our identity is in what we do instead of who we are. Being traded or changing jobs can devastate us. Are you carrying bitterness or any other baggage? Do you have the courage to talk honestly with God about your pain? Buried bitterness breeds nothing but trouble. Face off with God. He will set you free.
Hello, this is John Ramstead, the CEO of Beyond Influence, and I'm also the host of the Eternal Leadership Podcast. And I got to tell you, there's so many themes that jumped out to me as I listened to Ray, but here's the one that stands out the most for me is about his identity. And Ray's entire identity was tied up in hockey. And I was in college back in 1986 when this movie Top Gun came out, and I was a Navy ROTC, and I ended up becoming a Navy F-14 fighter pilot. I was a naval aviator. I flew off carriers. And then I eventually got orders to go to Top Gun. And I got to tell you, everything about who I was external. I was a fighter pilot, naval aviator, an officer, all these things. And everything was external. And then I was playing softball with some friends of mine. And I hear, look out! And I get hit in the eye with a line drive softball. And I have some nerve damage. And now I have some double vision. And the Navy processed me out. It was one of the hardest times of my life, and I didn't realize at the time, but when everything about your identity is external, other people's approval, who you are, what you do, it can be taken away in an instant. During that period of time, God brought people into my life that led me into a relationship with Christ, and I realized that when my identity is internal, when my identity is only based on my relationship, I love relationship with Jesus Christ. And I look at the mirror and I say, okay, this is who I believe to be true about me. But then I started reaching up to God and saying, God, how did you make me, and what is true, and what is the identity you see? And as I started closing this gap, all these other things that Ray struggled with in this beautiful journey that he was on, dealing with change and bitterness and forgiveness and self-forgiveness and the spiritual connection and finding an identity beyond what we do in those achievements, for me, all of that cleared up. So here's my challenge to you. Have you ever, or are you today, getting your identity from what you do and things that are external? And how are you navigating that? And what I would challenge you to do is reach up to God to find out the truth, because he'll tell it to you, and reach out to others that you can go through this journey to close this gap between your created self and the person God sees, who's beautiful and perfect. All right, God bless. Love you.